Hello, I welcome you all to the fourth module of the UGC course on applied linguistics. The fourth module is called multilingualism and language teaching. So it continues with the previous theme that why is it important for people who are interested in the application of linguistic theory and linguistic insights into uh, various domains of human activity like language teaching or computer science or neurolinguistics and various other areas. Why is it important for them to be aware that when you say language, it must subsume multilinguality, that uh, people don't have a language, people have a verbal repertoire. It may consist of what otherwise people would call 3 or 4 different languages. For example, my verbal repertoire consists of a lot of English, lot of Hindi, considerable amount of Punjabi, substantial amount of what people will call Urdu, for example, although I don't think there is a difference between Hindustani and Urdu, and of course, the language I used as a schoolboy when I studied in a small town in Mandi in Himachal Pradesh. So all these 4 or 5 languages together and a lot of variability. For example, I have the capacity to speak a little bit of Yorkshire English. Like, for example, I can say Stalins, God's town said. Now something, I'm sure you don't understand, but this is how it will be spoken in Yorkshire English, that means in the north of England, by English people, when they have to say it is a stallion, but it has got a star on its head. So that was a sentence which they would speak, and I can also speak. It's a star, God's town said, because the story of Black Beauty is the story of Black Beauty for them. Okay? So it's that kind of variation. So this kind of multilinguality must be subsumed when we talk of language, and all teachers need to be aware of that, and all people who are working in the area of applied linguistics need to be aware of that. We should also understand that language is not something which is frozen in time. The language faculty may be there as a shared attribute of being human, yes, but languages as they are used in society, they are not frozen in time. They keep changing all the time. People shift from language A in different kinds of circumstances. Immigrants would shift from language A to language B, and there are of course extreme cases of language death of endangered languages, either because of, let us say, a natural calamity like tsunami. Just people die, and with them the languages die. Or people may kill languages, in the sense they kill a certain community, destroy a certain community, and that language also dies with time, and their culture and their folk songs and their stories, they also die. Another point that one should understand about the fluidity of language. So, I have always been trying to put across this point that one end of our language behavior is highly rule governed, but the other end of our language behavior is always in a state of flux. It's constantly changing. When I see you, or when I'm now talking in front of the camera, my way of talking is very different from the way I'll talk to my friends. Okay? So you continuously modify your behavior in relation to your environment. Code mixing, which people dismiss as khichdi, as highly stigmatized, is actually a normal way of talking. If you think about words like, let's say, bus or switch, or for example train or car, if you think about these words, you constantly use them in Hindi, otherwise what will you use? So is that khichdi, or is that standard language, or is that good language or bad language? The point I'm trying to make is that we always always borrow words and expressions from other languages and make them our own, just as other people borrow from us all the time and make those expressions and phrases and words their own. See, something like the Oxford English Dictionary or the Cambridge or Webster English Dictionary, they have to, why do they become outdated? If languages were frozen, they will never become outdated. They become outdated because every time they have to add an appendix of new words that have come into. Whoever thought that Xerox will become a word of English language, not only as a noun but also as a verb? Okay, so you have Xeroxed. You can make, and I'm Xeroxing now. So you can see what is going on. So we keep borrowing expressions and words from different languages all the time. And this process of borrowing, this process of language mixing or switching from one language to the other, enriches languages. If you keep one language separate from the other language in an island or in an ivory tower, that language is bound to die. Okay, the moment you isolate languages from the lives of people and from other languages, they die, be it Sanskrit or Greek or Latin or whichever language, howsoever great, it will disappear. We always talk of standard language, because as opposed to what I am talking about, you must understand that what is the process of standardization. How is it that, at some point you start saying, oh, this is the standard language, this is the pure language, this is the language we should be using. It happens all the time. What happens is that in a given society, there are 4 or 5 different languages or very different varieties spoken, and one of them is picked up. Now, which one is picked up? The one that is picked up is the language of the people who have prestige, who have power, who have resources, who have money. Because it takes an enormous amount of money to implement a particular variety or language as medium of instruction, of education, publish books in it, publish its dictionaries, thesaurus, encyclopedias. It's not a small amount. So it is only people with enormous amount of resources who can participate in the process of making a language standard language. And once a particular variety has been selected, then it goes through the process of what we call codification and elaboration. That's what happens. You codify it. How do you codify it? You write a grammar, you write a dictionary, you write a thesaurus, and you say, this is the pure language. So when I don't know a word, I run to that dictionary and I think that's the final word, whereas the meaning of that word might have changed. It keeps changing all the time. That's why dictionaries have to be revised all the time, because by the time you put a word in a dictionary, its meaning has traveled 100 kilometers ahead. And then elaboration means that you start using that language in media, in the press, in the newspapers, in the universities, and then you start saying, wow, here is the standard language, without appreciating the fact that in real terms, this is a highly mixed language. It has words from Sanskrit, or it has words from Persian, or it has words from English. Even today, what do you do for a word like mouse? In English, or for any other, mouse is a mouse. You don't call it chuha in Hindi. So one should be aware of the variability, and one should be aware that this is the process of standardization, and as I said earlier, not stigmatize children because they come with a diversity of linguistic backgrounds. In fact, it has been very difficult for people to define who should be a bilingual or a multilingual. This has been a very controversial issue. For people, it's very simple, that a bilingual is one person who knows 2 languages, A trilingual is a person who knows 3 languages, and more than that, you say he is a multilingual. But the first thing I would like to clarify is that in today, in terms of research and in terms of linguists, the language science people talking to each other, or social linguists talking to each other, bilingualism and multilingualism are used interchangeably. So when I say bilingual, I mean multilingual. When I say multilingual, I also mean bilingual. Okay, so they subsume each other. For a very long time, people were struggling to define who should we call a bilingual. It seems very obvious, a person who knows 2 languages should be called a bilingual. But the moment you say how much, know how much, then the first person we see on this kind of scene is the famous linguist called Leonard Bloomfield, who in 1933 in his book said a bilingual is a person who has a native-like control on 2 languages. That person is called a bilingual. Okay? But native-like control means that, so Bloomfield said a bilingual is a person who has native-like control in 2 languages. Now, such a person perhaps doesn't exist. So, if I say that I am a native-like bilingual in let us say Hindi and Malayalam, the language spoken in the small town of Mandi in Himachal, then I can say that yes, Hindi I can read, write, speak and be comfortable with, but very often my Hindi will get mixed up with many English expressions and English words. And I think also I will not be able to understand I enjoy reading Hindi poetry, but high level of Hindi poetry, very formal and written by great poets, it will take me a while, for example, to be able to read Jaishankar Prasad or even the more difficult poetry of Nirala will not be very easy. It will take a lot of effort. On the other hand, Malayalam I am very fluent, but that also carries a mixture of Hindi and of English and sometimes Punjabi. All those get mixed up. When I talk to my dearest friends, my Punjabi and English and Hindi, all are there working simultaneously. This is very common. I'm sure it's common with all of you also. And that's the perspective we should have on the use of language. So, what do we understand by native-like control? That is an unsatisfactory definition because for example, I do not know how to read and write Malayalam. I don't have those skills there. I have only speaking and listening kind of skills. So I don't have a native-like control on, and I'm sure there are expressions and there are certain domains, cultural domains where certain kind of Malayalam is used, which I will not be able to understand, or I will not be able to function in those domains, although I am considered to be a fluent speaker of Malayalam. I am sure this is true of all of you. So Weinreich came up later in 1953 with a definition saying that if you can alternately use 2 languages, then you are a bilingual. But still the concept of a language is very central to all these definitions of bilingualism. Whereas I have been trying to say that languages flow into each other rather than being kept separate. Haugen and Theobald, then people gradually started saying that if you have some control on the other language, you are a bilingual. From native-like control, that means from perfect control, people said, look, okay, if you have some control on the other language, you are all right, that's okay. So bilingual definition started with maximal control, came to a minimal kind of control. Person like Mackay, he said if we want to talk about bilingualism, we should consider the degree That means to what extent you are bilingual. That means in terms of speaking, listening, reading, writing, at the discourse level, at semantic level, the level of meaning, to what extent you know two languages, that should be decided. You should look at the function, that in what kind of situations you use language X and you use language Y. So that was Mackay's position. And you should also see to what extent you alternate between the two. You do code switching, right? For example, मैं यदि हिंदी में भी बात कर सकता हूँ, उसके बाद मैं फिर से I can switch back to English, and very often we talk like that. And to what extent is interference? To what extent my, let us say, my Hindi interferes with my English? Okay. For example, the English people in England would say what we say make, sake, fake, rake, for example, make, sake, fake, would be pronounced as make, sake, rake, take. I say take because my language, my first language, either Hindi or Punjabi or Malayali, these are sort of my first languages. They do not have this sound a, okay. So I don't say make, I say make, okay. So this is what happens because of interference. If we want to talk about different kinds of bilinguals, then I think the distinction was given by a person called Theobald. Yes, I remember now. Theobald provided us how can we possibly classify different kinds of bilinguals. He gave us a typology of bilingualism. He said either you can be a coordinate bilingual, or you can be a compound bilingual, or you can be an incipient bilingual. So there are three types, okay? Coordinate, compound, and incipient. Coordinate bilingual is one. Suppose you are a bilingual in English and French. So you learn your English in England, but you learn your French in France. So you may have the same word, let us say chair or table, and there may be French words for chair and table, but in your mind, two different images are there. You understand? So if you chair and table, so you have the British image, and chair and table, or let's say take the example of Hindi. If I think kursi and maze, so kursi and maze will have different images associated with it rather than table and chair. So if two languages are acquired in two culturally differentiated, two socially differentiated backgrounds, then you may be called a coordinate bilingual. That is probably closest, as close you can get to Bloomfield's native-like control in two languages. Or you could be a compound bilingual. A compound bilingual is one who acquires his English and French both in England, or acquires, let's say, English and Hindi and Punjabi in India. Okay? I can acquire all three in Chandigarh, where I studied, for example. You can acquire Punjabi, English and Hindi, but they'll get mixed up. So I acquire three different languages in the same cultural setup, in the same social setup. So that is a compound bilingual. So I may have the word something like, let us say, Kolli, Katori and ball, let's say, or I may have the words cycle, English cycle, and the Hindi cycle and Punjabi cycle. I can have these words, but my image will be one. I'll have one image in my mind. The third category is that of the incipient bilingual, and incipient bilingual is one who has very nominal control on the other language. They can sort of Like, the taxi drivers in Bangalore. The taxi drivers in Bangalore not only understand Kannada, but they also understand Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, English and Hindi. They manage. They manage means they know a little bit, conversational kind of, languages, 3 or 4 languages, and they manage quite well. But if you want to engage in a long conversation with them in any one of the languages other than Kannada, it will be very difficult. So they are incipient kind of bilinguals. There are other classifications of bilingualism, there are other ways of looking at it, different ways of looking at it. One of the ways is that you naturally become a bilingual, and you become a bilingual in the tutored setting. That means in the classroom. So this is another way of looking at becoming a bilingual. You can become a bilingual. I learned, for example, 2-3 languages in a very natural setting, naturally. Or you can learn 3 languages in the classroom. You learn 1 language at home, English in school, and then you might also learn German in school. So they are called tutored settings, and they have different kinds of features. And I think it's important for teachers to know that natural bilinguals are going to look very different from the bilinguals who get their bilingualism or multilingualism in tutored settings. You also talk of balanced and dominant bilinguals. Balanced bilinguals are more like again Bloomfield's native-like control, that they have more or less same level of control in the 2 languages, and they can handle different situations in a more or less equal way. The dominant bilinguals have 1 language that is dominant in their day-to-day behavior, but the other languages are not as. You can also talk about successive and consecutive bilinguals, that you acquire 1 language after the other. The consequences will be different, but if you acquire 2 or 3 languages at the same time, the consequences might be different. Coming back to the issue of bilingualism or multilingualism, you see, there are certain myths associated with bilingualism or multilingualism, and they are very dangerous. And I think teachers and everybody else working in the domain of applied linguistics needs to be aware of them, needs to be sensitive about those myths. First of all, people think that, and it was believed for a long time till it was proved otherwise, that if you know more than 1 language, then it leads to cognitive deficit. That means you become intellectually poorer. The fact of the matter is, you become intellectually richer if you know 2 or 3 or 4 languages. The greater the number of languages you know, better off you are cognitively and intellectually. Okay. There was also a myth for a long time that if you know 2 languages or 3 languages, your IQ is very low, and which again has been proved wrong, that bilinguals have as high a IQ as so-called monolinguals, who I think don't exist actually. But even if they are compared, you find somebody who actually knows only 1 language but with lot of variation. Then the bilinguals have as much IQ as the monolinguals, but sometimes higher than the monolinguals. It was also believed that it leads to lower academic, lower scholastic achievement. Again, not true. And there is in fact a lot of evidence to the contrary now, that bilingualism, there are studies done by Peel and Lambert, studies done by Cummins and Swain, and many other linguists you will read about in your module, which have shown, beyond any doubt that multilingualism is very positively and very strongly correlated with cognitive growth, with scholastic achievement, and with social tolerance. If you know more languages, it is natural that you will become socially more tolerant, because you know about more societies, you know more about you know more about more cultures, and so on. Finally, we will talk about various theories of interference. We will devote a separate section to interference, and as I tried to explain to you that interference means that how your language, your one language interferes with another language. Let me give you an example, and then in a later module we will talk, because it's a very important theory. There is a whole theory of interference which again goes against bilingualism, in the sense that it says one language interferes with the acquisition of other. For example, if you take the English tag questions, I hope you will appreciate this. You will say, you're going to the market, aren't you? They are going to the market, aren't they? She is going to the market, isn't she? Right? So you get the same pronoun there, and the auxiliary and the negative in the tag question. But what do you say? आप बाजार जा रहे हैं ना? तुम बाजार जा रहे हो है ना? वह बाजार जा रही है ना? So that है ना is substituted in Indian English by isn't it. So you say, they are going to the market, isn't it? She is going to the market, isn't it? And so on. So this is called interference. People have also called it language transfer, and have generally given it very negative connotations. One would say that we should in fact talk of cross-linguistic influences, because sometimes the transfers can be very positive, and you already have the sounds. Let us say pa, ta, ka, ba, da, ga. In Hindi, you may have the same sounds in English, so that may be of great help. We should also, when we talk of bilingualism and multilingualism and interference, we should keep in mind the social aspects associated with them and different features of a language. What has been the history of contact, and what is the status of language? Take the case of trilled R in Thai English. That's a very sort of commonly cited case, and very interesting case. Trilled R as in very, merry, carry, ferry. That R, very merry. That kind of R, that R sound. In Thai English, they use it in their formal speech, but they will not use it in English in their informal speech. Why? Because in Thai, among the Thais, the trilled pronunciation, that kind of very merry kind of R, is associated with royal prestige. Okay, so it's not, interference is not a straightforward thing, and very often it may be a strength and not a weakness. Okay, and lot of things, you must be surprised about this, that English puts the verb in the middle. I ate an apple. So ate comes in the middle. Okay. In Hindi, you say maine seb khaya. Khaya comes at the end. No child learning English would ever say I apple ate. This kind of mistake is never seen. So there is no interference at the level of syntax. There may be some at the level of sounds, but not at the level of syntax. So we should be very careful when we say that one language interferes with the acquisition of another. We'll talk more about these things. Thank you very much.